This is the way. Oh, ho, ho. Greetings, Bucketheads. Mevar Tegar. Welcome to our 261st Acolyte accounting episode of Mandivision. I'm your host, Narguy Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small, independent Star Wars podcast. We're so glad you're here. Reach out to us on the socials. We're at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. Email the show, mandivisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, and follow this show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, Bucketheads, we're back for another episode of basically Mandovision After Dark yet again, because this time around we are recording moments after watching Episode 3 of Star Wars: The Acolyte. And longtime listeners of this podcast, you probably know that generally I don't do episodes right after that first viewing. I like to kind of sit with that episode for a little bit, process it a little bit. But life has other plans sometimes. And tomorrow, Wednesday morning, as you listen to this podcast, I will be having what I can only imagine is an extremely painful dental procedure performed on me. So I will not be able to do the podcast in the morning. Hence, why we are here after dark for another stellar episode of Mandovision After Dark. I have my adult beverage here to my right. I have my seductive, sexy voice loaded and ready to go for this episode. And we are going to dive into the third episode of Star Wars: The Acolyte. Now, since the last time we spoke, the haters have come out to play in regards to this show. Initially, if you had looked at online reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, any of those things, the ratings for the first two episodes were fairly high, right around that 8 mark. And since then, they have plummeted. So the negative review bombing has begun. And this episode in particular is sort of a catalyst for the movement against this show, which we knew was coming. I didn't want to address it at the time, but this is a show that has the potential to really divide the fan base yet again, for better or worse, and for reasons, depending on who you are, real or imagined. And that is unfortunate. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about some of this to a degree. I'd like to keep this podcast out of the muck, out of the negative sphere of the fandom, and just try to focus on the show, on the content, on the intent of what they're trying to convey in their storytelling. So we're going to try and avoid a lot of that negative energy that exists. This episode seems to be, again, sort of a focal point for a lot of negativity about this series as a whole. And after watching the episode, I think it is misguided, as I normally do. But also somewhat short-sighted because, again, this is episode 3 of 8. We haven't seen how everything plays out, but the world we live in, everyone needs to put their own personal issues and agendas on Front Street and sort of attach them to whatever they're watching and assume that the creators have their own agenda of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to tell. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. On this podcast, longtime listeners, we don't really deal with that necessarily. not in the sense of going down into the political spectrums. Like that's something that we really tried hard not to do on this podcast because because it's Star Wars, man. And Star Wars is supposed to be fun and for everyone. And, maybe there's elements of it that you don't dig or don't vibe with, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be everything for everyone. But, man, if we could all just have a good time, it'd be so much easier. Anywho, but again, people take their beliefs and their politics and their the way they view the world, their worldview, very seriously. And who am I to criticize them for that? As Obi-Wan Kenobi told us, everything's from a certain point of view. But I try my very, very best not to transpose my personal feelings, my personal beliefs onto Star Wars because I just want to watch it and have fun. So we're going to talk about Episode 3 of Star Wars The Acolyte. Let's go ahead and get our particulars out of the way, as we like to do, because I personally believe that it is important to acknowledge the creators of the show. Whether you agree with what they're doing or don't, I personally think it is worth acknowledging these people because they're creating Star Wars for us. And ultimately, in my opinion, that's a good thing. So, without much more beating around the bush, this is Star Wars The Acolyte, Season 1, Episode 3, Destiny. Directed by Koyanada, written by Jasmine Flournoy and Eileen Shim. Our primary cast for the week: Lee Jung-jae, Jodie Turner-Smith, Margarita Livia, Dean Charles Chapman, Junius Sumitomo, Lauren Bradley, Leah Brady, Carrie Ann Moss, Amy Sung, and so many, many more in this episode. And I think it's time to get into the episode in particular. A quote-unquote controversial episode that is intended to divide the fan base depending on what part of the fandom you're in. And listeners of this podcast, where I think we're not going to lean into the hate. We're not going to lean into the negativity. All Star Wars is enjoyable for someone, and we try our very best to embrace that for everyone. So, with that being said, let's get into the episode. You know what that means. It is time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go. So, I'd like to say this right off the jump. After watching the episode, I did jump onto YouTube. I wanted to see videos from the people that seem to have issues with the episode. And I watched to an extent. I couldn't watch all of it because some of the more vitriolic vloggers out there, they just wear me out so quickly with like a lot of the kind of like, I don't, hate speech might be a strong term, but the negative energy they exude is a lot for me, and I'm not interested in it. I'm not here for it. I have very little time to put up with it. And their arguments for why the episode's not great are thin at best, and again sort of align with whatever their worldview might be, and that's unfortunate. Now, do I think this is a stellar episode of Star Wars television? No, I certainly don't. It was not my favorite episode of The Acolyte. In fact, in many ways, I think this was a bit of a step back. A lot of Star Wars podcasts and a lot of Star Wars vloggers and people sort of in that Star Wars circle, with Lucasfilm, who got to watch the first 4 episodes. I suspect for them and many the other critics out there in the world who got to see those first 4 episodes together, this episode flows kind of well within in the storytelling constraints of getting to watch 4 episodes back to back to back to back. But as far as episodically, for the rest of us who are watching it weekly, this episode completely slows down the momentum of the series, which I think is an unfortunate choice, because again, those first 2 episodes really built up what happened on Brendok as a big deal, and for us to have to spend, I think spending the entire episode in that 16 years ago Brendok time period was a bit much. I think it should have been teased out a little bit more over the course of the series, because again, I'm going to reference what Obi-Wan said. Everything's from a certain point of view, and this episode's no different. Like, mostly it's from May and Osha's perspective. There's a lot that happens in this episode that we still don't know the answers to. So anybody who wants to attack this episode because May's fire mysteriously kills the coven of witches. No. Like, there's more to this still. There's a reason why Torben and the other Jedi associated with this incident feel shame. We have not gotten to that big reveal yet of what exactly occurred between the witches and the Jedi. Now, I do want to back it up also a little bit too, because again, we are on Brendok. We are seeing young May and young Osha. We are introduced to them as part of this coven of Force users. They refer to themselves as witches. Are they pre-Night Sisters? Are they an offshoot of the Night Sisters? That's information we don't have, but it's not new to the lore for there to be a all-female sects of Force users. This is not new to anyone. I am an old man. They did this in the 90s, okay? It was in much of the expanded universe at the time. So anyone who has an issue with all-female Force user covens has not been paying attention for 30 years. Another element that, I don't even know. Like, my frustrations with the internet sort of are taking hold a little bit, because every one of those vloggers that I watched doesn't seem to have an understanding of Star Wars beyond what's on film, what's been on TV, and that's a shame. And I understand. I understand why their perspective is so narrow and so focused on these things. But every concept that they talk about in this episode is not new. The idea of other Force users who are not Jedi have their own philosophy around the Force. In this instant, it's what these witches in their coven refer to as the thread, and pulling on the thread as a way to use and manipulate what we Star Wars fans commonly know as the Force. This isn't new. This is stuff that has been gone down. We've gone down this road before, particularly if you are in my age bracket and you have read the Expanded Universe. You know that Luke Skywalker spent many, many years going around the galaxy and finding other Force-sensitive cultures and beings and spent time with them to understand the way that they viewed the Force and the way they used the Force. And again, it wasn't the Force to them. It was always something else, just like it is with the Night Sisters. And it's mind-boggling to me that certain Star Wars vloggers and podcasters will get so up in arms about something that this is not new. It's familiar territory. It's almost common in Star Wars literature. I mean, they do this in the High Republic series currently, but they were doing this in the Expanded Universe 30 years ago. So the notion that people are fired up about this is rather frustrating and rather irritating. And it just smacks of people who don't want to do the work. And again, I understand there's a lot of Star Wars expanded universe. You don't want to. Star Wars is great because you can approach it from many, many angles. You shouldn't have to read the books. You shouldn't have to read the comics. But when you're going to go on your podcast or on your YouTube channel and decry something without having done the homework first, it's first of it's arrogance. But you're just uninformed, and you're getting other uninformed people fired up too. And I find that unfortunate because the Star Wars fandom is in a perilous place right now. It is often held up as an example of the toxic fandom that exists out there. And if we would hold some of these vloggers and podcasters more accountable, that would be lovely, because then maybe they would stem the tide of their negativity. But again, they're welcome to their opinions. So understand what I'm saying. Like, uninformed opinion is not great, but they can still have their opinions, and you don't have to agree with mine. Maybe you don't, and that's okay. That's what this podcast exists for. When we disagree, it's okay. We can have the conversation, and still respect each other at the end of the day. And like I said, I don't think this is a great episode of Star Wars television. I think this is a bit of a step back. I liked a lot of the forward progress in the first two episodes of The Acolyte, but I think this one, it hit the brakes too hard, and we lost that momentum by going and spending an entire episode in the past. I would have liked to see this teased out more over the course of the 8 episodes, as opposed to one full episode dedicated to what happened 16 years ago. And then at some point, we will get the inevitable flashback from Master Soul of what really occurred between the Jedi and this coven of Force witches. It just, again, that's my perspective on the storytelling. As far as the story itself for this episode, yes, there are definitely some things that I have questions about, that I don't quite understand the train of thought or the logic involved. I did enjoy seeing young May and young Osha and beginning to realize how different they are even as children. Again, I still don't ascribe to the theory that May is just evil, evil, evil. I think there's more to it. And we get a little glimpse of that in this episode. Obviously, May wants to stay with her mother, with Mother Anastasia, with Mother, what's the other one? Coral, and be part of the coven. Osha wants to go out into the galaxy. Now, how Osha knows about the galaxy at large and Jedi in general is another question that I don't quite have answers for, and they don't explain. So that is a bit of a plot hole in that regards, because I would think that this coven of witches would insulate these twins from knowledge of the outside galaxy, of the Jedi and who they are. What exactly brings the Jedi to Brendok in search of these children? Why are they so upset that this coven of witches is training children? Specifically when it's alluded to that Brendok is outside the Republic, so the Jedi do not necessarily have jurisdiction there. These are interesting things. These are interesting things that I want to examine more fully. The idea of the Jedi as baby thieves, as the stealer of children. Like, that's not a new concept either. Like, this is in the mythology. If you read the books, if you read the comics, there are cultures out there that view the Jedi in this regards. So it's not new to look at the Jedi in this light. And again, this is another thing that people are attacking the show for, is that, they're portraying the Jedi as bad guys. Well, astute listeners of this podcast, you know how I feel about the Jedi, specifically because of their affiliation with a political entity. The Jedi are, in concept, noble beings out there trying to do their best to make the galaxy a better place for everyone. But their alignment with the political entity, aka the Republic, ultimately brings about their downfall because they are now tied to that political entity's agendas and goals. We've talked about this in the past. So the Jedi ultimately are going to fail because they align themselves with a political body. That's a different podcast, but again, that's where I stand on this thing. But again, the idea of Jedi as not heroes is not new either. So don't bristle against it when that's brought up as a main element of this series. And that's what I'm trying to say there. Now, in regards to Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral and the notion that they have created May and Osha via the thread or the Force, as they may view it, I'm not quite sure how I feel about that just yet. I have seen many a vlogger attack that thread as undermining Anakin Skywalker and what Darth Plagueis and Sidious do in those books to create the quote unquote chosen one in Anakin. We still aren't entirely sure that's what happened, that they used the Force and the midichlorians to conceive children. That's implied, but we don't know that's the case just yet. I want to see how that kind of plays out. I don't want to leave it like right now is just ambiguous enough that I don't want to attack that plot element just yet. Because I would have issues with it. I wouldn't be the biggest fan of going that route in your only 100 years prior to Plagueis and Sidious doing the same thing to create Anakin, basically, and then ultimately destroy the Jedi via that route. Now, are there ways that they could do that and still salvage the relationship that Anakin will have with the Force? Yeah, there are. So let's see how it plays out. Let's be patient. Let's be mindful. Like Qui-Gon says, let's be mindful of the living Force and see what happens here. Again, initially I bristled on it, but I want to see if it's, again, it's intimated, it's hinted at that this is what they did to create these twins, but there may be more to it. We know that Mother Coral allowed the twins to grow in her, and that Mother Anastasia did something to create that life without a father. And again, these are elements that seem to have angered a portion of the fan base because it diminishes the role of a man in a relationship or whatever the belief is. But again, this is all in Star Wars already. Anakin Skywalker not conceived by a man, in case you forgot. So I urge patience, I guess is what I'm really trying to say. Let's take a breath and let the show play out. There is a lot of negativity about this episode and the quote-unquote space lesbians that this coven would represent to a portion of the fandom. I don't have time to deal with that. But again, nothing in this episode is a new wrinkle in Star Wars. These elements have been addressed in the new canon, in the expanded universe of old. It's just kind of reformulating things. And I need people to understand that. I need you to understand that. I don't ask a lot of you guys, but I need you to understand that the things in this episode that seem to be making people angry aren't new. I was reading this stuff in the 90s, and then I was reading it in the early 2000s, and then I was reading it in the 2010s. These elements have existed for a long time, They're just using them in a slightly different way, a slightly altered way to tell their story. Now, again, I remind you, not the biggest fan of this episode. There are things in it that require certain leaps of logic. Again, you have May, who is loyal to the Coven, who wants to stay with her mother and the Coven, and then you have Osha, who wants to go out into the galaxy and be a Jedi and do all these things. Now, again, I remind you, I don't know how she knows about the Jedi. I don't know how she knows about the galaxy at large. Those are plot hole issues that need to be addressed. But it is what it is. I don't know how. It seems like a bit of a leap for May to just like, oh, if you're gonna leave, I'm gonna start this fire and kill you. Feels like a leap. It does. I'll be straight up with you about that. That's not my favorite moment for the May character to go from, I'm not gonna let you leave. I'm just gonna murder you with fire, and then the notion that this fire consumes the entire fortress that this coven exists in, because A, it's all rock, not exactly conducive to fire. So again, credulity stretched a bit, but there's more to this sequence than we know so far. We're only seeing a limited perspective, but we are getting hints of what was addressed in episodes 1 and 2 of the season, of May and Osha, their past history, but there's things to it that neither one of them know. And that's the mystery of the show. The Sith is also a mystery, but the mystery of what happened on Brendok is a driving element of this series, and we need to be cognizant of that. Again, if you think this answered those questions, it did not. We do not know what role the Jedi played in the extinction, genocide, mass killing, whatever you want to call it, of this coven of Force-sensitive, quote-unquote, witches, all right? But obviously they did something, or why would Torben have taken the Barash vow? Why would he be so racked with guilt that he commits suicide, something we've not seen from a Jedi? And again, Kelnaka living out in the forest. We don't know what ghosts Indira had because we barely met her before she met her demise, and we don't quite understand Soul's ghosts either at this point. So again, this episode teases a lot, gives a lot, but leaves us still in a place where we need to know more. And again, like Qui-Gon told us in episode 1, we must be patient. Give it time. Let these people tell their story. Again, your personal philosophies, your personal beliefs may affect the way you view the show, and that's your business and your right, and that's okay. But I do strongly urge you to not project that onto the show. Let it tell a thing. Let it tell its story. And then after its 8 episodes are done, if you hated what they did, then we'll talk. And odds are, like, you will be in a better position to support your arguments. And that is all I ask. You don't have to like every little thing that Star Wars does, but I would really respect it more if you could support your arguments on why you don't like it. And that's kind of how I view this series so far. Again, I'm 3 episodes in. You're 3 episodes in. I didn't get to see episode 4. I'm not in the inner circle of Star Wars insiders and podcasters and vloggers. No. I'm watching this with you guys. So yeah, I had some issues with this episode, the way it decided to tell the story. But maybe when episode 4 comes out, if you watch those 4 episodes in a block, it plays out as a more cohesive narrative. But that remains to be seen, and we'll talk about that next week. So, that being said, I give the episode, it's kind of a soft 6.5 buckets. I could probably be persuaded to up it to 7. because I like the stuff with Osha and Kalnaka. I like the stuff with Osha and Soul. There's a lot there to kind of gravitate towards for the series. But by and large, it's a slower episode. It really pumps the brake on the narrative that they were pushing in episodes 1 and 2, which I find to be unfortunate as far as the pacing for the series goes. But again, in hindsight, maybe after 8 episodes, I rewatch it. I'm like, oh, you know what? That flows better now that I can watch all 8 back to back into infinity. So we shall see. We shall see, my friends. What did you think? Did you buy into the controversies? Do you think they're blown out of proportion? Or are you kind of on my train as far as being patient and waiting to see how this all plays out over the course of the next few weeks? Like I said, it's a soft 7, 6.5. What did I say? I don't even know. 6.5, 7, somewhere in that range. I'll be watching it. I'll be watching the episode again, probably tomorrow after I have my dental procedure done and I can't talk anymore, and we'll just kind of see how it plays out. So, yeah, that's where we land with this one. As far as the series goes, as far as this podcast goes, we are in line to be on time with episodes next week as well, for episode 4. But I do have to mention that for episode 5, we will be delayed. It is my wife's birthday. We will be out of town. I will watch the episode, but I will not be able to comment on it for at least 24 to 48 hours is sort of the expectation currently. But I'll keep you guys posted as best I can. If you follow us on the socials, maybe I'll be able to post a little IG story on there. I'll do my best. All right, friends. That being said, I think we're going to wrap up the podcast right here because I think I covered everything I needed to cover. You know, there's a lot on Brendok I want to know. How did the Jedi find the twins? How did the Jedi know this coven was there? Is this coven connected to the Night Sisters or some other group? There's a few Force-using groups in the High Republic era that are mentioned in the novels. Are they connected to them? I'd like to know more. I would like to know more. So, will we get those answers? Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So, remember, reach out to us on the socials at Mando_Vision on Twitter /X and Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If possible or so inclined, please give us those sweet 5-star reviews. They help out the small independent shows like us stand out, not get lost in the intergalactic shuffle. And this is Mandovision. I'm your host, Nargai Tom. Thank you for checking us out and supporting us. Bucketheads, go out there, be great Star Wars fans, even in the face of so much negativity around this show. If you're liking it, let people know you like it. Don't let them get overwhelmed by the negativity on the internet. And if you're not liking it, well, that's fair too. Your opinion's yours. I get it. I respect it. I understand. But let's get back together next week. But again, be great Star Wars fans. Embrace other opinions and other perspectives. Don't shame them. Don't hate on them. Just listen and have a conversation and have a dialogue and be respectful of each other. That's the best way for the fandom to exist and move forward, in my opinion. All right, Bucketheads, we'll be back next week to talk about episode 4 of Star Wars The Acolyte, assuming my dental procedure does not kill me, murder me. I do not wake up from it tomorrow. So, otherwise, I will be back next week to talk about episode 4 of The Acolyte. All right, Bucketheads, go out there, be great. I'll talk to you later. And remember, this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.